In the heart of Redding, California, Nikki Cheng Saelee-McCain's life seemed like any other. A 39-year-old mother of 4, Nikki was the kind of person whose absence would leave a profound void in the hearts of those who truly knew her. Her story was one of devotion, of familial ties, and of surviving adversity. But behind the smiles and the role she played as a mother and daughter, there was a hidden darkness, one that would soon consume her. Nikki had always been the peacemaker in her family. Growing up in a Laotian immigrant household, she learned from an early age to put others first, to care for her mother and siblings. When she met Tyler McCain, she thought she had found a protector, a partner who would help her create a better life. But over time, their relationship grew toxic. Tyler was charming at first, but his controlling behavior gradually began to show. What started with minor arguments turned into emotional manipulation, and soon, Tyler's possessiveness escalated into physical abuse. Despite the abuse, Nikki stayed, convinced that she could fix things. She had children to care for, and she couldn't imagine a life without Tyler. But in 2023, after an especially violent episode, Nikki made the life-changing decision to leave. But escaping wasn't simple. Tyler's behavior had already become volatile and unpredictable. While Nikki secretly planned her departure, Tyler's jealousy and control only grew stronger. His verbal abuse was constant. "You'll never leave me," he'd tell her. "No one else will want you." Nikki confided in her sister Chloe, revealing her fear that Tyler would never let her go. But she still had hope. Hope that she could escape. Hope that she could start fresh. That was until the fateful morning of May 18th, 2024. May 18th, 2024 began like any other day. Nikki woke up, made breakfast for her children, and kissed them goodbye. She sent her sister Chloe a text, going to return the truck to Tyler's mom. That was the last message anyone would receive from Nikki. Nikki had planned to return Tyler's truck, a seemingly simple task that would mark a turning point in her life. But she never arrived at her destination. Her vehicle was found abandoned in a desolate part of town, its engine still warm. But there were no signs of Nikki. No struggle, no blood. Just an empty truck and a growing sense of dread. The family immediately contacted the police. At first, authorities didn't suspect foul play. They thought Nikki had simply left, perhaps seeking distance from Tyler. But as hours turned into days with no word from her, the investigation intensified. Nikki's phone records showed her last communication, an unanswered text to her sister, and then silence. The investigation turned its focus to Tyler McCain. He was the last person to see Nikki, and his strange, unemotional response to her disappearance immediately put him under suspicion. But Tyler denied having any involvement in his wife's vanishing. He claimed he had no idea where she was, though his behavior didn't align with his words. Investigators began to dig into his past, uncovering a troubling history of domestic violence. Nikki's family began to fear the worst. They started searching for their sister, putting up missing person flyers, and reaching out to anyone who might have seen something. But the days dragged on with no new leads, and with each passing moment, the odds of finding Nikki alive grew slimmer. The investigation into Nikki's disappearance took a dramatic turn when authorities discovered a red truck, seen near the area where Nikki's vehicle had been abandoned. A witness came forward, reporting seeing the truck follow Nikki's truck on the day she vanished. Investigators traced the truck to a local resident, but the driver was still unidentified. With no body, no confession, and no witnesses, the investigation stalled. The sheriff's office expanded their search, combing through the area around Redding, hoping for any sign of Nikki. But the search revealed nothing. With the clock ticking, the question on everyone's mind was, where had Nikki gone? Meanwhile, Tyler McCain became more and more evasive. He provided inconsistent alibis, and his refusal to cooperate with investigators deepened their suspicions. His lack of concern for Nikki's well-being and his odd behavior during questioning painted him as the prime suspect. As the investigation progressed, investigators dug deeper into Tyler's past, uncovering a history of abuse, manipulation, and violence. Nikki had confided in her sisters about the abuse she had suffered, but they never imagined it had gone this far. The detectives now had a motive. Nikki had been planning to leave Tyler to escape the cycle of abuse. Tyler could not let that happen. Did he finally take matters into his own hands? Though there was no direct evidence linking Tyler to Nikki's disappearance, the circumstantial evidence was mounting. It wasn't until months later, after a DNA sample was taken from Tyler's vehicle and matched with evidence found at the scene, that the case truly started to come together. While the investigation continued, Nikki's family fought tirelessly to keep her story alive. Chloe, Nikki's sister, was relentless in her pursuit of justice. She knew that the only way to bring her sister home was to keep the pressure on. She organized rallies, worked with local news outlets, and kept the public informed about Nikki's case. But it wasn't just about raising awareness. It was about the emotional toll that Nikki's disappearance had taken on the family. Her mother, Teresa, was devastated, unable to cope with the uncertainty of whether her daughter was alive or dead. Chloe, too, felt the weight of responsibility. As Nikki's closest ally, she vowed to carry the burden of seeking justice for her sister, even when the pain seemed unbearable. Despite the challenges, Chloe continued her advocacy, speaking at public events, working with domestic violence organizations, and meeting with officials to push for legal reforms. Her focus was clear. Nikki's case needed to be heard, and those who suffered from abuse needed to have a voice. As time passed, the Saelee-McCain family found some relief in the community's response. People in Reading and across the country rallied behind Nikki's family, offering support and ensuring that her story was never forgotten. The media coverage of Nikki's case began to shift the narrative on domestic violence, bringing to light the complexities of abusive relationships and the importance of supporting survivors. Chloe's efforts were paying off. The case, once a distant tragedy, had now become a national cause. As more people learned about Nikki's story, the Saelee-McCain family began to feel a growing sense of hope that justice might eventually prevail. Tyler McCain's arrest was the beginning of a new chapter in the search for justice. In March 2025, after months of investigation, Tyler was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful disposal of a body. The family's fight for justice had reached its peak. At the trial, the prosecution presented a strong case, backed by forensic evidence and testimony from Nikki's family. The DNA found on Nikki's purse, Tyler's suspicious behavior, and the mounting circumstantial evidence all pointed toward one inescapable conclusion. Tyler McCain was responsible for his wife's death. But Tyler's defense team tried to create doubt, claiming that the evidence wasn't conclusive and that the case was circumstantial. They tried to paint Tyler as a man who had been falsely accused, someone who had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Tyler guilty of first-degree murder and other charges. The courtroom erupted in emotion as Nikki's family was finally able to hear the words they had longed for: justice. For Nikki's family, the conviction was bittersweet. It didn't bring Nikki back, but it did provide some closure. The man who had controlled her, hurt her, and ultimately killed her would never hurt another woman again. As the gavel fell, Chloe and Teresa, though still grieving, knew that they had won. They had given their sister the justice she deserved, and through their tireless work, they had turned her death into a powerful call for change. Nikki's legacy will live on in the countless lives her story has touched, through her family's dedication to justice, through the foundation established in her name, and through the laws that have changed as a result of her case. Nikki's memory will continue to inspire others. The fight for domestic violence awareness is far from over. But thanks to the Saelee-McCain family's efforts, the world is a little safer for those who live in fear. Nikki's story is not just about loss, it's about resilience, love, and the power of a family's fight to change the world. The trial had concluded, and Tyler McCain was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Nikki's family found solace in the justice system's verdict, they knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with emotional challenges. The toll of Nikki's death had left indelible scars on her loved ones, but they had vowed to keep her memory alive. For Chloe, Nikki's sister, the fight was never just about punishment. It was about healing, for herself, for her family, and for the community. She had been at the center of the battle for justice, but now she faced a new challenge: how to help her family heal from the wounds left by the trauma of losing Nikki. Chloe's resolve remained strong. She would carry the burden of seeking justice for Nikki, but she knew that healing couldn't be rushed. It would take time, support, and courage to rebuild the pieces of their lives that had been shattered. As the months passed, Chloe and her mother, Teresa, channeled their grief into something far bigger than themselves. They worked together to establish the Nikki Saelee-McCain Foundation, an organization designed to support domestic violence victims and raise awareness about the dangers of abusive relationships. The foundation provided shelter, legal assistance, and counseling for survivors. But beyond these services, the organization's mission became a beacon of hope for those who had suffered in silence. Nikki's family refused to let her death be in vain. Every event they hosted, every story they shared, was an opportunity to remind people that domestic violence could happen to anyone, and that there was always hope for escape. The foundation quickly grew, reaching thousands of people who were in desperate need of support. Chloe became the public face of the movement, speaking at conferences, organizing rallies, and meeting with lawmakers to push for stronger laws on domestic violence. As Nikki's children grew older, they began to take on roles of their own within the foundation. The young ones, who had once been too young to fully understand their mother's death, now grew into determined advocates. In their own right, they worked alongside Chloe, attending events and sharing their own stories of growing up without their mother. Though they still carried the pain of their loss, Nikki's children found strength in their mother's legacy. They began to speak out, sharing how their lives had been affected by domestic violence and how they were determined to make sure that no other child had to grow up in an abusive environment. For Nikki's children, the foundation became a way to honor their mother's memory. They knew she would never be forgotten, not as long as they continued her work. They became a living testament to Nikki's love, strength, and resilience. While Nikki's family had secured justice in the courtroom, their fight for justice was far from over. They knew that Tyler's conviction was just one piece of the larger puzzle. The laws surrounding domestic violence needed to change, and public attitudes needed to shift. Too many women, children, and men were still trapped in abusive situations, too afraid to seek help. Chloe, Teresa, and the foundation began to partner with law enforcement agencies, schools, and community organizations to implement preventative measures. They worked tirelessly to develop programs that educated young people about the signs of abusive relationships and the importance of recognizing unhealthy behavior early on. The movement continued to grow, with Nikki's family pushing for stronger laws, better victim support services, and more resources for those at risk of violence. They knew that no one would be safe until society acknowledged the full scope of domestic violence and took action to protect victims. One of the most powerful parts of Nikki's legacy was the voice it gave to survivors of domestic violence. Through the foundation and Chloe's advocacy, survivors were empowered to speak out. They no longer felt ashamed or isolated. Their voices became instruments of change, and the more people who shared their stories, the louder the movement became. The I Am Not Invisible campaign, started by the Saelee-McCain Foundation, became a viral movement, with thousands of survivors sharing their experiences on social media. The hashtag spread globally, breaking the silence around domestic violence and providing a platform for survivors to support one another. It wasn't just about sharing painful memories, it was about reclaiming their power. For Chloe, the success of the I Am Not Invisible campaign was a reminder of Nikki's impact. What had started as a fight to honor her sister's memory had turned into a powerful call for justice, a call that could not be ignored. Nikki's story had traveled far beyond Redding, California. Her case, and the movement it inspired, had become a global call to action. The Saelee-McCain Foundation worked with international organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence, ensuring that the conversation reached every corner of the world. The foundation provided support for survivors in over 20 countries, from establishing shelters in war-torn regions to helping survivors navigate legal systems in countries where domestic violence laws were underdeveloped. In some places, the foundation's work helped spark new legislation aimed at protecting victims and holding perpetrators accountable. Chloe traveled the world, meeting with leaders, activists, and survivors. She spoke about the importance of global solidarity and how domestic violence was not just an issue for women. It was an issue for society as a whole. Men, too, had to be involved in ending this cycle. Without their participation, the change would never be complete. And as Chloe spoke, she saw the faces of survivors in every room. From victims in rural villages To women in large urban centers, the faces were the same, pained but resilient, determined to live without fear. Nikki's story had inspired them all to find the strength to fight back and to speak out. The Saelee-McCain Foundation had become one of the largest global organizations dedicated to ending domestic violence. It had expanded its outreach programs, providing not only safety, but also education, economic support, and long-term rehabilitation for survivors. Nikki's legacy had grown into something far bigger than the tragedy of her death. It had become a worldwide movement, one that had shifted cultural norms, changed laws, and saved countless lives. Her children, her family, and the survivors she had inspired had created a world that was safer, more supportive, and more aware of the dangers of domestic violence. Chloe, who had started as a sister seeking justice, had become a global leader in the fight against domestic violence. She never could have imagined how far their fight would go. And though Nikki was no longer here, her spirit lived on in every life the foundation touched, in every survivor who found their voice, and in every law that was passed to protect victims. Nikki's story was no longer just a family's tragedy. It was a global call for justice, a reminder that the fight for equality, safety, and respect was not over. And as long as the Saelee-McCain Foundation stood, the world would continue to honor Nikki's memory, her courage, and her unwavering love for those she left behind. In the years following Nikki Cheng Saelee-McCain's death, the global movement for domestic violence awareness reached unprecedented heights. Thanks to the tireless work of Nikki's family, particularly her sister Chloe, the Saelee-McCain Foundation became a powerful force for change. No longer was domestic violence a taboo topic discussed only behind closed doors. It was now a global issue demanding immediate action. Chloe, who had been driven by the pain of losing her sister, transformed that grief into a mission. She became one of the leading voices in the fight for domestic violence survivors, using Nikki's story to raise awareness, rally supporters, and push for lasting legal reforms. She traveled around the world, speaking at conferences and participating in global panels, always bringing attention to the importance of early intervention, education, and support for victims. The Foundation's mission spread far beyond California, reaching survivors across the globe. Their outreach efforts provided critical support in areas that lacked resources for victims of abuse. With partnerships established in more than 30 countries, the Saelee-McCain Foundation's impact was felt across borders, cultures, and systems that had once neglected to address the devastating effects of domestic violence. One of the core strategies of the Saelee-McCain Foundation was prevention. Chloe and Nikki's family understood that for real change to happen, society needed to address the root causes of domestic violence. With a focus on educating young people about healthy relationships, consent, and respect, the foundation created programs designed to start early, before the patterns of abuse took root. The foundation had collaborated with global educational institutions to implement anti-abuse curricula in schools. The programs provided students with the tools to recognize the warning signs of unhealthy relationships and to foster environments where mutual respect was the foundation of every connection. The foundation also worked with local law enforcement and first responders to create specialized training on how to handle domestic violence cases with sensitivity and urgency. Law enforcement agencies, previously ill-equipped to handle such complex cases, now had access to the proper resources to protect victims and provide necessary interventions. Chloe, in her speeches to lawmakers, emphasized the importance of these preventative measures. "We must start early," she would say. "Educating the next generation to understand what healthy relationships look like is the most powerful tool we have in the fight against abuse." A key element of the global movement was its ability to break down cultural barriers. While domestic violence was widely recognized in the Western world, many countries had not yet fully addressed the issue. The Saelee-McCain Foundation recognized the need to adapt their approach to fit the cultural and legal landscapes of each region, ensuring that survivors received the support they needed, regardless of geography or tradition. In countries like India, South Africa, and Brazil, where domestic violence often went unreported, the foundation worked alongside local leaders, activists, and social workers to create safe spaces for survivors. These shelters not only offered physical protection but also provided victims with legal assistance, therapy, and job training to help them rebuild their lives. One of the most significant breakthroughs came in the Middle East, where cultural norms around family privacy and shame often kept domestic violence hidden. Through the Foundation's advocacy, several countries passed new laws that provided greater protections for women, including harsher penalties for perpetrators and improved resources for victims. The conversations, once silenced by cultural taboos, began to take place in public forums, raising awareness and offering hope to those who had suffered in silence for so long. Another crucial element of the movement was the involvement of men. Domestic violence had traditionally been viewed as a women's issue, but the Foundation emphasized the need for men to be part of the solution. Chloe and the Foundation's leaders understood that to end domestic violence, society needed to challenge the deeply ingrained gender norms that perpetuated abusive behavior. Through community outreach programs, the Foundation began to engage men and boys, teaching them the importance of respect, consent, and emotional intelligence. They organized events where male role models, athletes, and public figures spoke about the need to stand against violence and support women's rights. The goal was to shift the narrative, to make it clear that real masculinity was rooted in respect for all people, regardless of gender. The Foundation's efforts to engage men were groundbreaking. By 2030, they had helped create men's advocacy groups across the world who worked alongside women's organizations to address the root causes of gender-based violence. The message was clear: men must be part of the conversation if there was to be lasting change. As the movement gained traction, legal reforms were at the forefront of the agenda, with Saelee-McCain's case serving as a pivotal moment in the legal system. The Saelee-McCain Foundation worked alongside legislators to reform domestic violence laws around the world. They lobbied for stronger protections for victims, faster response times from law enforcement, and more stringent penalties for perpetrators. In the U.S., domestic violence survivors began to see laws passed that provided greater protection in family court, ensuring that abusers could not manipulate custody arrangements or continue to control their victims through legal loopholes. The Foundation also pushed for better funding for shelters and victim support services, ensuring that those who sought help could access it without fear of running out of resources. The Foundation helped draft and advocate for the International Convention on Domestic Violence, a global treaty that sets standards for the treatment of domestic violence victims and the punishment of perpetrators. Countries that ratified the treaty were required to implement national frameworks for addressing domestic violence and provide survivors with the necessary resources. Global domestic violence laws had changed for the better. What was once considered a private matter had become a universally recognized human rights issue, one that governments could no longer afford to ignore. The work of the Saelee-McCain Foundation had become a cornerstone in this fight for legal and societal transformation. Looking ahead, the future seemed brighter than ever. With the Foundation's global impact and the partnerships they had built across the world, Nikki's story was no longer just a story of loss. It was a story of hope, of redemption, and of collective action. The fight was far from over. There were still many challenges to face, many communities to reach, and many lives to change. But the Saelee-McCain Foundation had proven that change was possible. Their tireless work had created a world where survivors had a voice, where their stories were heard, and where resources for help were more accessible than ever before. As Chloe reflected on the years of hard work, sacrifice, and personal growth, she found peace in knowing that Nikki's death had not been in vain. "We've created a world where no one will ever have to suffer in silence," Chloe said. "This is our legacy, and we're just getting started." The Saelee-McCain Foundation's global efforts were just the beginning. The seeds planted in Nikki's memory would continue to grow, creating a safer world for future generations. A world where love would always be kind, safe, and free from abuse. Nikki Cheng Saelee-McCain may no longer be with us, but her memory lives on through the lives she touched, the laws she changed, and the movement she sparked. Her death, though devastating, became the catalyst for an unprecedented global movement. A movement dedicated to ending domestic violence and ensuring that no one ever again had to live in fear. Nikki's legacy will continue, not just in the work of the Saelee-McCain Foundation, but in the hearts of every survivor who has found the courage to speak out. Through them, Nikki's spirit lives on, inspiring others to fight for a world free from abuse. Her memory will forever be a beacon of hope. Nikki Saelee-McCain's life was tragically cut short, but the legacy she left behind is one of resilience, empowerment, and the unwavering determination to fight for justice. Her family's fight for her, and their tireless efforts to change the world in her name, have made Nikki's story one of global significance. From the day she was taken from them, her family vowed to make sure her voice was never silenced, and through their work, Nikki's story has reached millions. The Saelee-McCain Foundation, founded in her name, continues to provide life-saving services to victims of domestic violence. Shelters, legal support, and emotional counseling are now available to countless survivors who, like Nikki, were once trapped in the cycle of abuse. Through this foundation, Nikki's memory lives on, not just as a symbol of pain, but as a symbol of the power of change. Thank you for joining us in honoring Nikki's legacy. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories, like Nikki's, to raise awareness and to keep the fight for justice alive. Remember, together, we can make a world of difference.